How spiritual arrogance is holding you back. Now, this is one of the biggest traps on your spiritual path, on your spiritual journey, and that is arrogance. Not ignorance, arrogance. But arrogance and ignorance are actually very intertwined. We'll get to that in a little. But this arrogance, this spiritual arrogance, is something that we share as a society in America. We share in our Western culture, but it's also on a personal, individual level. And I want to first talk about this on a personal, individual level, especially on my own journey. So, at the beginning of my spiritual journey, you could say that your spiritual journey begins when you're born, but I don't think so. You have the term reborn when you start to, I know this is already getting really deep. You start to get reborn and you start to become more awake or aware. And this happened to me. My spiritual awakening started, my spiritual journey, I would say, started about 4 years ago when I was going through depression. I was extremely arrogant. And when you're arrogant, you're very closed-minded. You think that you know it all. I was this Mr. Know-it-all, always thought I knew everything. And I would get very good grades in school, yes. But I was trained to believe that being smart is better than being wise, and there's a huge distinction between those two. I was led to believe that being book smart is actually being smart when it's not. Being able to color in bubbles on a multiple choice test doesn't mean that you're smart. So I was kind of led into this false belief that I was actually smart and that I knew more than I did. That led to this big arrogance, this intellectual arrogance. And a lot of people have this intellectual arrogance, especially, again, in our Western culture. In America, we're very left-brain, analytical, scientific, atheistic, or atheist. And this arrogance kept me closed-minded to everything. And then basically it all started to crumble once I was going through depression. My ego started to crumble into little bits, little pieces, tried to cling on to what I could, but it couldn't. It all basically just dismantled like a house of cards, and I had to build it up from the ground. I had to start basically at ground zero, or at the foundation, and I realized the biggest, most important lesson was to stay humble, was to completely open my mind, because up to this point in my life, nothing was going right. I didn't know anything about my emotions. I didn't really know anything about myself. I didn't know how to express myself, and I was just living in fear. I was so scared. I was so scared of everything, scared of death, scared of everything, because I was ignorant. I didn't understand what life was. I didn't understand that it's all just kind of a giant game of love and light, and they're intertwined. We'll get to that in a little. But I was so closed-minded that I wasn't seeking these things, either in myself, in my heart center, in my gut, up here. I wasn't seeking these things within, and I wasn't seeking these things without. I wasn't listening to other teachers. I didn't even think that other people, normal people, could be my teacher. There's really no such a thing as normal. Again, whole nother different rant. But I was so closed off to the world around me. Arrogance. This arrogance leads you to being closed off, because you think you know more than other people, and you think that there's nothing that other people can teach you. That's the quickest way. It's the quickest way to hold you back. That's the slowest way to actually learn and progress on your spiritual path. So from this journey, I started to realize that, again, through these amazing teachers that I've found in books that I've read, and being able to meditate and tap in and introspect and look from within, began to realize that every single person has lessons to teach you. Not just every single person, every single situation has lessons to teach you. Every single animal, every single species has something to teach us. When you take this humble view of the world, that everybody and everything is your teacher, say the world is kind of like a school or a university, everyone and everything is your teacher, and you are the only student, how does that shift your mindset? You're not really looking to impose your worldview onto others. You're letting everything come to you. You're integrating this information, and you're learning all the lessons that you can. And from my experience, this is how I started to level up exponentially. And when I say level up exponentially, when I was going through depression, when I was at the lowest on my spiritual journey, I would say I was all the way at the bottom. And when you start meditating, when you start tapping in, when you start reading more books and growing on your spiritual journey, doing your practices, again, all of our paths will be different, and I'll get to that in a little. All of our paths are different, but the difference of our paths is actually a good thing. Again, I'll get to that, the whole diversity and unity and how diversity actually makes us stronger. Actually, I'll just get to that now. One of the things about spiritual arrogance that really holds people back is that they think that their spiritual path is the best. Again, this arrogance, they think that they're superior. This superiority, they think that my spiritual path is up here and other spiritual paths are down there. So they try to pull other people up by indoctrinating them into their belief system or trying to force them into their spiritual path. And now there are so many examples of this throughout human history and throughout now of people who think that, not just think, that they know 100% that their spiritual path, that their spiritual journey, that their spiritual practices are superior, are better than others, when in reality, I know this is kind of a mind-blowing epiphany, but in reality, all spiritual paths are equal. Everybody has their own specific journey, everyone has their own specific preferences, and everybody gets drawn kind of naturally to their own spiritual path. And some people might think, well, what about atheists? That's not a spiritual path. That is a spiritual path. Because I think that most people who are atheists don't really understand this, but again, this might even come across me sounding a little arrogant, so I want to check myself a little, especially when I'm watching this back after it, but that people who are atheists, they don't believe in God, they don't believe that God exists, or along those lines, they don't realize that just because they don't believe in God or the common definition of God, they're still putting their belief and their faith in something, whether that something is science, whether that something is their self, their own ego. And often these people make their own ego their God. And the funny thing is that these people actually might be the most spiritually arrogant of all, because they're closed-minded to other people's beliefs. That how could somebody possibly believe that God exists and there's no evidence and faith is dumb and all this stuff, and they're so closed-minded. And people who believe in God are closed-minded, except for the fact that when you really start to tap in, when you really start to learn about faith and embody it, and realize that faith requires you to put your small ego aside and to open up your mind to something that's far more intelligent, infinite intelligence, far more powerful. All right, that again is a side rant. But the thing is that if somebody's atheist, or if they're not, or if they're vegan and they want to try to make it seem like you're a terrible person because you eat meat, they're trying to play the shame and guilt game and blame game, but at the same time maintain their superiority over you on a spiritual level. And as we know, on a spiritual level, nobody is superior to anyone, because all is equal, all is fair, all is one, all is whole. So where this spiritual arrogance starts to hold us back is that we build up these walls. We build up these walls because we don't want to let other people's teachings in. We don't want to let other people's opinions and perspectives and perceptions about life in, because we think that that will somehow shatter our own worldview. And first of all, if you have to build up these walls to kind of try to protect your own worldview and your ego from getting shattered, that should be the first sign that you have this little spiritual arrogance. It might not be that big, but everybody has these kind of blocks, these kind of walls that we build up. And I realized, I love these analogies, these metaphors, because they really get to the core of it. I realized that learning more about spiritual knowledge and wisdom and all this stuff is more about tearing these walls down, working on yourself, than it is about actually going out and doing stuff and learning stuff. And sure, that stuff will help you to tear down these walls, maybe going to learn about a new culture, learning about a new religion, learning about a new school of thought, but it's not really as much about doing as it is about being. And this kind of came full circle for me, introspecting back on who I was 4 years ago, how low I was on this journey, is that I'm exponentially higher spiritually, higher vibration, higher knowledge than I was 4 years ago. But I'm way more humble because, and here's the big paradox. Back 4 years ago, when I was Mr. Know-It-All, thought I knew everything, I thought I knew absolutely everything. Objectively, I know thousands or millions of times more knowledge and stuff and practice than I did those 4 years ago. Read so many more books, met new people, learned new lessons, did meditation, yoga, all this stuff. But I now know at this point that there is more to know than I will ever possibly know. And I feel like I know less than I ever have before, even though I know that I know more than I did. And it's extremely funny, but at the same time, I know that it's not, how do I phrase this? It's not about who knows the most. This is going to be very interesting. It's not about who knows the most. It's about who knows a lot of stuff, but realizes the infinity of knowledge, the never-endingness of knowledge, that there's always going to be more to learn. There's always going to be more to know. There's always going to be more to learn. And if you keep up these walls of arrogance, not only is it going to block out other people from coming into your spiritual path and maybe joining you in the spiritual path, but it will block out all of these gems of wisdom that are effortlessly coming to you. It will block the flow of love, the flow of light that's always coming in and through and out of you. Wow. So basically, how the spiritual arrogance is holding you back is that it stops you from opening up your mind and seeking new knowledge, seeking things that can help you level up. And one of the big things about leveling up on your spiritual path is basically realizing that the spirit always goes in front of the ego. That might not make sense to some people, but we're very, again, like in our Western culture, we're very left-brained. I'm very left-brained, analytical, always want everything to be, proof and everything right in front of me. And you realize that stuff doesn't really work on the spiritual path. The spiritual path is not rational. And that's why a lot of these rationalist, scientific-minded people, like I used to be, have a hard time grasping this stuff, have a hard time grasping some of the right brain things such as faith and intuition. I never used to believe in intuition. Again, this belief that I had that intuition didn't exist and that other people who did it were dumb, all the stuff, this was just spiritual arrogance by me. and then I was in for a rude awakening. If you ever heard the term rude awakening, when you have this spiritual arrogance and you finally have your spiritual awakening and your breakthrough, it is usually a very, I wouldn't say traumatic experience. It's usually a very rough experience. It's a rude experience, a rude awakening. You're awoken to the fact that, damn, you've been very arrogant. You've been blocking the flow of love. You've been hiding in your little tiny box of fear while everybody's been playing out in the light and the love around you. That's a good analogy. That's a good metaphor. Can't wait to watch that one back. But I want to get to the point now where this spiritual arrogance is not just holding us back personally. And I also want to say before, I know that just listening to this also, it does kind of come off like I am kind of sounding spiritually arrogant. Like, who am I to say that other people are being held back by this and not me? I'm the first one to say that I've been held back by this spiritual arrogance on the past 4 years, or even before I even started the spiritual journey. This arrogance has always been something that's been holding me back from expressing myself, holding me back from actually being authentic, because I always tried to compare myself to others and feel superior. So I just want to say that this spiritual arrogance has been holding me back, which is another part why I'm making this video, trying to hold myself more accountable while also helping people learn lessons from my journey. My spiritual path has been a rocky road, to say the least. A lot of ups and downs, a lot of bumps, but I've realized that all of the downs have come when I've started to become arrogant, when I've started to kind of rest, think that I know it all, as I've kind of said before. But once I started to let that all go, to kind of ground myself in being, ground myself in breathing, that's when I started to let all of that stuff go. And I realized that the whole spiritual arrogance, you kind of develop this spiritual ego. You can't have arrogance if you don't have an ego. If it's all just spirit and selflessness, there's no arrogance. But I started to develop this spiritual ego where you start to look at other people and how could they be doing that? Or why do they love eating fast food and all this stuff? And I realized that, again, my spiritual path is not any better or worse than anyone else's spiritual path. Every single person, whether they know it or not, is on this spiritual path. All of these paths originate from the same source. They all return to the same source. But while they're in between these sources, they are all different. They're all 100% unique. And that's because they're all these life lessons that God or life or you, whatever you want to call it, wants to learn. And they learn it through you. They learn it through me. They learn it through us. There wouldn't be as much to learn if everybody had the same exact spiritual path. Some people stray a little farther from the source. Some people are on the straight and narrow. Or if you think about the middle path, that analogy. But as a culture in America, especially in America, we are very spiritually arrogant. Which is interesting because I think I saw something that we're at the lowest point of people believing in God, or the lowest amount of people believe in God as they ever did, and that point is declining. One thing that makes me show is that we are very spiritually arrogant as a culture. We're also very detached from our spiritual source, but the thing that I don't really understand, that I'm kind of trying to wrestle with right now, is why are we so spiritually arrogant? I guess it really all comes back down to ego, because why do we feel like we can just destroy the environment in order to make money, in order to, have our fancy yachts? Not my fancy yachts, mostly, Bezos and Musk and all these people, but why do we feel like we can just tear down the environment, destroy it, in order for technological advancement? And I guess that's because in America, the profit is our profit. The money is some people's God. In capitalism, these people might not believe in God the way that religious or spiritual people believe in God, but this belief in money is still belief. Whether you like it or not, money is not real. Money is not real. It's only real because we believe in it. Money has no value other than the value that we give it. It exists because we believe in it. And some people might think, well, that's the same thing with God. God only exists because some people believe in it, or God doesn't exist. Maybe if you take a different mindset shift and think that, what if God was something that's completely beyond belief? Belief might help you climb a couple ladders to get there, but at a certain point, you might have to even let go of those beliefs, because beliefs are something that are limited, something that we are creating in our minds, and this whole God thing, or whatever words you want to use, love, peace, light, is infinite and completely beyond that perception. So back to that. Again, a little rant. Getting a little off topic here. This spiritual arrogance is holding us back as a society, because everybody is so closed-minded. Everybody is so stuck in their system of beliefs. Now, I would say that I'm very open to system of belief. I've read probably over hundreds of books on different belief systems, taking what kind of I see in common, because what I realize when I read all of these different books and tap in and have my own experiences is that there's a lot more in common than there is separate. The commonality between all of these is that it's all about love. It's all about peace. It's all about tranquility. It's all about being a good person, both to yourself and others. It's all about freedom, personal freedom for yourself, and not infringing upon other people's freedoms. So that stuff all sounds well and good. How does this stuff get corrupted? It gets corrupted with ego. Ego leads to arrogance. We have this spiritual arrogance that my path is better than yours, or his path is better than hers, and they should conform to that single path, that specific path, because we've decided that that path is the best. Well, let me ask you, who's decided that that path is the best? Think about how many spiritual paths there has been since maybe 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, when human civilization kind of started to congregate. That's a good pun. When human civilization started to congregate, whether in temples or churches or just by themselves, meditating or praying, looking up at the sky, whatever you do for your spiritual practice, Who is somebody to say that their spiritual practice is better than yours? Who is somebody to say that their spiritual practice is better than yours? And that's what I realized. Why I realized I had to change myself before I could make a video like this is because I used to be one of these people. I used to, meditate for 20 to 25 minutes a day and think like, why wouldn't everybody just do that? I mean, it's not easy, but it makes you feel a lot better. It makes you become more connected and all this stuff. It makes you feel more love. And then I realized that I spent 20 years of my life just completely unaware of what meditation was. I wasn't taught about this stuff. I have to have some compassion because our school system doesn't teach meditation. Our school system doesn't teach a lot of this spiritual stuff, which is so obvious to me now, but wasn't obvious to me 15, 20 years ago when I was born, allegedly. One of the big things is that we don't teach this stuff to people. We don't think that it can be taught. So then when people stumble upon this knowledge, like I did, kind of by accident, and that's how most people get tossed on this spiritual path kind of by accident, or at least they feel it does. And once you start to, become more awake, more aware, have more knowledge, you start to think that you're the only one who knows this stuff. At least that's how I thought, and that led to my spiritual arrogance, and I didn't progress as quickly as I dreamed or as I wanted to until I started reading all these books, and I started realizing like, wow, people have known this stuff, or especially Tao Te Ching, people have known this stuff for thousands of years. There really goes a lot of my spiritual arrogance. I thought I just made this stuff all up. No, people have known this stuff for thousands of years. You read the Bible, maybe you don't believe everything the Bible or the Torah or the Quran says, but there is a lot of this truth stuff in there. People have known this stuff for thousands of years. And I realized, who am I to say that I know more than these people? I don't. And one of the biggest ways to just stop the spiritual arrogance is just to be able to admit, I don't know. I don't know. You don't have to have all the answers. All the answers are right here. You don't have to have all the answers here, especially in your left brain. All the answers are going to be here. All the answers are going to be holistic thinking. We don't do that enough as a society. We don't do that enough as a culture. So how does this spiritual arrogance hold us back as a society? Well, we see this during war. A lot of wars are caused by spiritual arrogance. Oh gosh, I don't want to get into that. How about the food that we eat? Oh gosh. The food that we eat. Everybody's trying to push. It's really just all marketing. Spiritual arrogance can be seen through marketing is basically trying to force your belief systems onto somebody else. If you think about how people try to convert other people to other religions, what is that? That's marketing. When McDonald's is trying to sell you a burger, what is that? It's marketing. They're trying to push their belief system onto you. And you might not think that it gets that deep, but everything at its deep essence is spiritual, especially the food that you eat. If you think about, the metaphor that your body is a temple, that might sound cliche, but these companies know this stuff. These companies know this stuff very well. Would you honor your body by putting in, divine fruits and vegetables and grains, or are you going to do it by putting in cheap, greasy fast food? Listen, the choice isn't that simple for some people, again, because we're all on different spiritual paths, and I myself used to eat a lot of this stuff until I, became more conscious, more aware, started to reform my diet a little, and I have compassion, I have sympathy for people, but I noticed that a lot of the people eat this stuff because they don't realize this stuff on a deep level about how it's actually affecting their body, how it's affecting them mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And I guess you could say the same thing with the TV that we watch, the movies that we watch. Really everything in society is really spiritually bankrupt. Wow, that's funny, and at the same time, just, gosh, sad. But I think that the answer to this, the answer to not letting this spiritual arrogance hold us back any longer on a personal level and on a societal level, is becoming more humble. Being able to say, I don't know. Being able to look at other people and say, that person is my teacher. That lesson is very important to me. That situation can be my teacher. I might not agree with his or her spiritual path, but there are a couple of lessons that I can take from that and apply to my own spiritual path. Just my 2 cents. Hope you enjoyed this video. Signing off.